In this video, we make a small side table and have big issues with veneering. This table starts with these pieces of sapele, which have arrived at my workshop planed all round. Sapele wood in general is, in my opinion, an underrated wood, and I wanted this project to highlight some of the natural beauty of the grain. I started by making panels out of the boards which will form the legs of the table. For this, I'm using floating tenon joinery in the form of dowels. You may notice the dowels have been positioned more to one side of the panel. That's because I will later route out a groove detail in one side, so I wanted to make sure I avoided hitting and exposing any dowels. With the dowels in place, I glued up and let it dry. Once dry, I sanded the panels to remove any excess glue spill, and so the joint line is barely noticeable. The base is designed to be somewhat secondary to the tabletop, which will have a feature veneer and will draw most of the attention. As such, I wanted the base to incorporate a robust but more importantly simple geometric joinery, so the focus would be on the top. Next, I'm marking out the cuts for the half lap joints, which will connect the legs to the stretcher. I cut out the half laps with a drill and pull saw, and later cleaned them up with a chisel. I wanted to modify the standard half-lap joint by incorporating a small void to better accentuate the joinery. Let's call it a saucy half-lap. This strange shape I'm drawing out will be the mating cut for the half-lap. But first I wanted to add a vertical groove detail to the legs, which corresponds to the half-lap joinery. This was again to better celebrate the joint in a simple geometric way. This gave me a great chance to use this new attachment for my router, which allows me to use it along a track. I then put my router back into the router table, and using a corresponding round over bit, I filleted the outer edges of the legs and stretcher. With that done, I cleaned up the roundovers and sanded out any burn marks. So now I could get around to cutting out that funny shape I was drawing out earlier, and for this I used a pool saw and cleaned up with a chisel. I could then sand the parts and trim the legs to their final length on the miter saw. I taped the legs together to ensure that they would come out exactly the same. With the parts of the base assembly complete, I could then glue it all up. I just wanted to take this chance to say that if you're enjoying the quality content on this channel, such as this shot of my bicep, please consider subscribing. It helps me and the channel out massively. Thank you. So now I could focus on the tabletop, and for that I'm trying book-matched veneering for the first time, using these sheets of Amboina burl, which I was drawn to because they really looked like bacon. I cut a straight edge on both pieces and decided that because the edge was so wavy, it would be better to glue one piece at a time. I later realized this wasn't a good method because there was a lot of glue spill out and it made it harder to then align the second piece precisely. Nonetheless, I pushed on and the first half came out pretty much perfectly. The second half, however, had a lot of bubbling and the seam line was too obvious. So I did what any self-respecting woodworker would do and tried to sand the issue away. I then rubbed on some mineral spirits to see if it was salvageable, but I could tell that it wasn't the look I was really going for. So instead I decided to try again on the other side of the tabletop, using 2 new pieces of veneer. This time I taped them together beforehand and glued them all at once. Now once dry, I know it may look like a mess, but I could tell the seam was much better and there was no bubbling veneer anywhere. So this felt like a big improvement, so I proceeded to sand down the edges and then continue to add edge banding. To connect the top to the base, I'm using figure 8 fasteners. I know these are screwed into the end grain of the base, which is not usually a strong connection, but I tried some test pieces and could tell it would be plenty strong. Next was applying finish, and for that I used Osmo for the base, and my plan was to use a water-based polyurethane for the veneered top. At first the water-based poly looked great for the top, but unfortunately after it cured I felt that it ended up looking too muted, so I decided to sand it back and just stick with the Osmo all over. And that's when this happened. Yep, that veneer was less than 1 mil thick and I just sanded through it. In the end though, I took this as a blessing in disguise. I wasn't really happy with the look of the veneer after all, so in the end this gave me an excuse to go with something a bit more modern. So instead I decided to scrap the veneer completely and make the top from 2 new pieces of sapele. My plan was to cut an interlocking shape into the 2 boards to create a bit of visual interest. I cut this interlocking edge with my new router and cleaned up with a saw and chisel. Now I'm still undecided whether this interlocking panel glue up was really worth it. It was a lot trickier to get the edges to match perfectly than I first thought. But anyway, it's done now. Because I put a lot of effort into this small detail, which may go completely unnoticed, I decided to glue the 2 pieces up around a contrasting plug, which acts as a kind of keystone and celebrates the joint. I had 3 options for this plug: sapele, oak and tulip wood, and in the end I felt the tulip wood gave a better contrast, so I went with that. After the top was dry, I gave a round over to the top and bottom of the 2 ends, again highlighting the strong geometry of the overall piece. I added my logo and finish. And with that, the table was finally complete. This is a table formed from several changes of intention. My original intention was for the base to be less showy than the top, but coming up with a less obtrusive design made me consider some of the more simple details. In doing so, the base became more interesting as a piece of joinery than first thought. Similarly, the tabletop was designed to be the standout element, but following the many failed attempts with veneering, I pivoted to make it more pragmatic, in a way which it could still incorporate a unique joinery detail. As a result, the whole piece has become something it wasn't originally intended to be. However, all these failed attempts and errors gave the chance for creative solutions, and the final piece is one that is better than the one I originally planned. So my first and second veneers may have been a disaster, but it gave the opportunity for such a table to exist. Thank you for watching. Until next time.